All right. I am going to share the page. Let's see here. All right, so welcome. My name is Derek Cowell, and this is History 31. And what we are doing is we're covering the Spanish colonizer at first, and then we'll cover the indigenous, in particular the Aztec. All right, and then that will dovetail into the Black Legend and Spanish colonization. All right, and so as I look at this, please recall what I had put in the initial message to everyone that you are to not take at face value that which you read. It's coming from a particular slant, and so that slant is um, determining what facts I'm selecting and what facts I'm omitting, how I'm interpreting those facts and how I'm presenting them. All right. So feel free in your personal evaluation to think whatever you do on a given topic. Some of these I have tongue in cheek as I'm writing them, knowing how slanted this particular argument might be. So with number one is a little bit more, to start the semester, it's a little bit more informative than it is argumentative. I wanted to convey the message that, historians like Howard Zinn, they try to depict this kind of monolithic group of waspy Europeans coming from the feudal era, coming to an early barbaric form of capitalism, and just blinded by greed and xenophobia and just desire for others' resources, etc. And they put them all together as if they're in one group. And what I wanted to do right off the bat is to illustrate the fact that the Spanish were a very uniquely motley, very diverse group of people. All right. So I just kind of give a general history of the different peoples that had colonized, had immigrated into, had conquered Spain to illustrate that fact that there's anything but a this homogeneously Iberian Spaniard. All right. So the Iberians were the name given to them from the Greeks in Spain and Portugal in the Iberian Peninsula. And from the very beginning, you see the influence of Greeks, okay, the Minoans, the Macedonians, the Mycenaeans. I'm sorry, the Mycenaeans, and other groups. I have a PowerPoint as well that I could put up online that illustrates the particular demographics of peoples that came into Spain and from ancient times. And I think I will put that up. But at any rate, when you look at it, right, you have the Greeks in Ampurias down in the Mediterranean coast of Spain. Um, you have the Lebanese coming from Tyre, and they also are going to, Lebanese are going to be the ones who found Carthage. And so the Carthaginians of mixed ancestry of Berber. The Berbers are a Hamitic people of Kush from North Africa, and quite mysterious origins in some ways, especially when they try to depict what they look like as far as skin color, etc. All shades of dark, but not put in the same category as the Bantu speaking black Africans beneath the Sahara Desert. So at any rate, you had Berbers, you had Lebanese, they formed Carthage, and so Carthaginians, all through the Straits of Gibraltar, had access for millennia to Spain and used that access. You also have the Romans by the 200s BC, and they're going to actually fight over Spain in a place called Saguntum with the Carthaginians, primarily over Spain. And so in the Punic Wars. And so, of course, the Romans win, and the Romans colonize what they call Hispania. and they have the Hispania nearer and Hispania further in the Latin translations of them. And so they split it east and west. Okay. And so we'll get back to that. But then you have the fall of Rome in the 400s. And with that, you have the rise of the Visigoths, the Western Gothic people. And of course, they were uh, ethnically, linguistically, culturally, they were German, they were Germanic. And when they took over, however, it doesn't happen too often, but the colonizers actually largely embraced the culture and customs and institutions of the very people that they dominated, that they defeated, which was Rome. And so when you look at the history of Spain, you can make the argument that there's more of an historical tie with Rome in Spain than there was in England. In England, right, the Angles and Saxons took over, and they largely made England over in their own image, as often happens with a colonizer, but not the case with the Visigoths. So we know that in the form of the language, the Romance language that would become Castilian or Spanish. It's more Latin based than it is Germanic. And we also know it through the Constitution and government, which they largely took from the Lex Hortensia Roman Constitution in creating their Visigothic Constitution and monarchy. So at any rate, you had the Visigoths for a while. And then in 711, Ibn al-Tariq had a North African army at this time. By this time, I'm not sure when the name caught on, but the Spaniards started calling them Moros or Moors. This Moor army from North Africa took over Spain and named it Al-Andalus, from which they get the term Andalusia, Spain. And when they do that, they're going to be for centuries tied into the Umayyad Caliphate back at I believe it was Damascus in the Near East where their caliph was. And so they're going to eventually have problems in Damascus, and that sultanate will fall, and they break free from that sultanate, the Umayyad, and they kind of become their own um, sultanate in Spain and Portugal. And so, at any rate, they're going to send armies of Arab soldiers to come into Spain, and so that's one more cultural influence that the Spanish people are going to experience. And then, whom I had forgotten at the very beginning are the Celtic people, right? And that's where you get kind of the instance of lighter eyes, lighter eye color, and lighter skin color in amongst the Spanish, amongst some, is the Celtic influence. And so just all kinds of ethnicities and nationalities have had a hand in Spanish history. And so, at any rate, that is going to, and it's going to rise and fall as far as conflict with their Umayyad uh, colonizers. They're going to be centered in Cordoba, Spain, the Muslim authorities, and they're going to have periods of what they call convivencia. Con, right, with, and vivir is to live, and so to live with one another peacefully. So they had years and they had certain leaders, bashas, governors and leaders in Cordoba, who were quite tolerant and coexistence was seems to have been rather peaceful. But then you also had like Muhammad the First and other leaders who had great religious rebellions against him, and he cracked down on the Spanish people. And so, also, it was not just under one Muslim leader. They put it into a system called typhus, and the typhus were it was like feudal, like feudalism in England. Things were highly decentralized into districts, and you had local lords and vassals who had to work on their lands and pay them in tribute and in taxes, just as happened in medieval Europe. And so that's going to happen until things really take off in like the 11 and 1200s. increasing number portions of Spain began winning their independence from the Muslim authorities. And so that's another thing that's interesting with Spain are the regional differences, right? So you had, oh my goodness, you had Catalonia, you had Navarre, you had Leon, you had Castile, you had Aragon. And in many ways, they were their own little countries. Okay. Um, and then of course you had the Basque people up in the Pyrenees Mountains by the border with France, and they have maintained their own ethnic and cultural independence and identity up in that region by Bilbao, Spain. So at any rate, lots of different Spains, lots of different ethnic groups have been a part of this history, and yeah. And then, not to mention, you have the Spanish crown get its hands in what was called the Holy Roman Empire. And of course, the joke was, right, is it wasn't really holy, it wasn't much Roman, and it wasn't much of an empire. But remember, this began with Charlemagne, Charles the Great in France, where he's going to claim to take up the Christian label of um, one empire that was once Rome under the Roman Catholic Church, especially fighting off Muslim onslaughts into Central and Western and, of course, Eastern Europe. So, at any rate, yeah, you have a lot going on. And so, Carlos the First, who was known as Charles the Fifth, was the Holy Roman Emperor. He had his foot not only on the throne of Spain, of Castile, but he also had it in his hands in Italy. And Italy was not united, by the way, into the many different city states. But a couple of the city states, he had his hand on the throne. Austria, and then by virtue of inheritance and claims for the Spanish, the lowland countries, which were Flanders, which is today Belgium, and the Netherlands, right, where the Dutch live. And so they're going to incorporate these people under one crown, under Carlos the First of Spain, and they're going to use some of their fighters as mercenaries and move some of them into Spanish frontier. So you have plenty of Belgian, French, Austrian, Italian soldiers and others who are going to eventually call Spain their home. All right. And then by the 1300s, Portugal will break free as its own independent nation and kingdom. But of course, up until then, they were collectively known as Iberians of the same stock. But as you know, like with the Portuguese language, as similar as they are, it is with the Castilian Spanish on paper, they sound much different. And of course, the Portuguese have had their own distinct history. So lots and lots of diversity in Spain. Okay. So that's the point I wanted to convey on number one, is that there's no such thing as just Spain. There just isn't. At the time, right, of the conquests in the 1490s and the early 1500s of the Americas by Spain, uh, you know, Isabella had a an infant niece who was supposed to have taken over the throne from her uncle, and she they call her Beltraneja. But being an infant, right, she would need a regent to rule for her until she came of age. And Isabella kind of usurped it and said, you know what? She's not of age. I'm going to take this position. And so she grabbed that position, and she was seen as a usurper, unlawfully stealing the throne from the Beltraneja child. And so she had her own drama in Castile. Castile also was the main area there on the Meseta, the open plains and an open table geographically of Spain, where most of the fighting against the Moors was still going on in the 1400s. And so you had a very highly militaristic culture in Castile. And matter of fact, some of the crowns had declared uh, poder real absoluto, like absolute royal power over their Cortes, over their parliament, and over their people. And so Castile, even back then, some historians would contend was a little bit backward and old school and quite intolerant and militaristic and aristocratic of a region of Spain to take its hold over the Americas. But she was more powerful, Isabella was, than Ferdinand of Aragon. And Ferdinand had half brothers who wanted his throne and felt entitled to his throne. So he was precarious also in his rule over Aragon. So when they married, it was largely a political pact to strengthen themselves and each other. And but it's too bad because like with Aragon, they had city fueros, the fuero, right? Like fuera de algo, like outside of something. The pueblos could say, we don't have to abide by everything that the king or queen um, demands. They had a tradition of civil disobedience in Aragon, where they would say, obedezco, pero no cumplo. I obey, but I don't comply, because it goes against their conscience as Catholics. And so you don't have that in Castile. You had it in Aragon. So we'll never know how colonization might have been different had Aragon been the one to formally colonize the Americas rather than Castile. But technically, the Americas were put under the flag of Castile before Spain was really truly unified as one nation and one kingdom. All right. So at any rate, moving on to number two, as I just mentioned two ironies. All right. And the ironies, I think you'll find a more of a clear-cut thesis on this one, an argument that I'm conveying, and it's two-sided, right? So for one, the Spaniards practiced a lot of the same colonizing methods that have been used against them in their remote past. All right. So the way that they have been bullied by the Romans in particular, and then by the Moors. They practiced a lot of those methods of colonization when it was their turn to be the bully against the Native Americans and over them. All right, so a clear example of that, right, is the old Roman latifundia. Uh, if a Roman soldier conquered land in Iberia, in Spain, and he was entitled to the land and he was entitled to the forced labor of the native Iberians whom he had conquered. All right. Then oftentimes the Spaniards came as single men and they ended up marrying or at least having children with native Iberian women. And so with these children, right, these half Spanish, half Italian or Roman um, children, it depended upon the goodwill and the connections of the dad, of the Roman dad, if he was going to see to it that he could get give opportunities to his son to have some power and to have some influence in his Spanish society that was held over by the Romans. So some of them were given unique access to education, all right, and in the liberal arts and studies that the Romans offered back in Rome. Then also, of course, you could be groomed to try to be uh, a lower house representative elected into the tribunes. And so that was an opportunity that some half Spanish, half Roman kids had. You could also fight for the Roman army and rise up that way, or you could join the Roman Catholic clergy and make your way up by piety and a good reputation as a religious figure. So those opportunities were about it uh, for um, for native Spaniards conquered by Rome, and they do the same thing to the Native Americans. instead of latifundia, it was called the encomienda. And then with the encomienda system, the Spaniards were given title to lands and to the forced labor of those that they had conquered in such lands, known as the encomienda. And it became so deeply ensconced amongst this new kind of Spanish aristocracy, if you will, in America by people like Hernando Cortez, right? Who conquered great swaths of land. They become this new aristocracy that the old aristocracy back in Spain are going to resent and distrust. And in some cases, they're going to lose a lot of their powers and initial grants and privileges because of that distrust. But when that same Carlos I revoked the encomienda system and said that, okay, the encomienda system dies in this generation with it. So whenever they die, they cannot, their sons, their eldest sons or whomever, cannot inherit their father's encomienda, that the natives are to be freed from slave labor. And that's a whole other topic that we can get into when we do the Black Legend soon. So at any rate, the Spaniards it didn't work. They killed the viceroy, the Spanish viceroy in South America. They nearly killed the viceroy in New Spain or Mexico, and Carlos I had to give in and concede that he did not have the means presently to put a forceful end to the encomienda system. Such was the desire and expectation of these new Spanish conquerors and their sons to enjoy this forced labor. All right, so that happened, and then also, right, you have the royal crown's version of that whereby the royal crown could come to these what they were called Repúblicas de Indios, these native republics, right? It was usually like with the Aztec and others and the Inca. It was a group of very densely populated native populations that had not yet been forced to assimilate and to learn Spanish and become Roman Catholic and to be integrated into Spanish society. And so they were kept apart separately under their indigenous rulers. But of course, they had to pay tribute and they were kind of marginalized and not given the same opportunities as others. So they would go to these Repúblicas de Indios and they would make demands of thousands of their young native men to have to engage in public works, to build cathedrals, bridges, canals, fight as soldiers, as mercenary soldiers, etc. And it was called the repartimiento system. And so you have the encomienda, the forced labor under private conquerors, and you have the repartimiento that was under the royal crown and forced the natives to work for them. All right. And so, as a part of both, they forced the indigenous to work in the mines. As you may know, in Bolivia, at San Luis Potosí, and in Guanajuato, Mexico, they found a lot of gold and silver, and so they extracted a lot of wealth, especially silver, from the Americas. And but they forced and the natives to do grueling work to extract this mineral wealth from their own land, from which they didn't receive a penny. And it's ironic, right? Because the Spanish had been forced to work in their own mines around Saguntum by the Romans. All right. Then also, much was in the hands of judges when they were underneath the Muslim Umayyad Caliphate back in Spain. They had in the Taifa system, each Taifa had these known to be well-respected elderly judges to adjudicate disputes, right? Referee disputes and consider guilt and innocence and so forth. And so, of course, they were supposed to be unbiased and just and have a good reputation for integrity. But of course, they at the end of the day, they were Arabic or more ethnically and culturally, and the Spaniards' fate was in their hands. And the Spaniards did the same thing to the Native Americans. It was called the Audiencia, and it was a system of judges, of Spaniard judges, to adjudicate disputes and decide guilt and innocence with the indigenous people here in Americas. So they likely got that tradition from the Moors, who had taken them over. And so notice, right, they treated the natives much in the same way that they had been treated by those who had bullied them in the past. Then the second irony is, right, is the Romans or the Spaniards were so proud of what they saw as accoutrements of civilization, right? Facets of being civilized. And but the irony here is under number two is virtually every example of such that they could and did use to try to argue their superiority over the Native Americans, they did not devise historically themselves. They piggybacked off of other people who had moved into Spain, who had conquered Spain, etc. in the past. So that which they, possessed, which they thought was the sine qua non of being civilized, they didn't come up with any of it themselves. They got it from other people. I find that to be a second irony with the Spanish. All right. And so, an educational system, a Republican type of government, constitutional with a written constitution, they get all that from Rome, right? Their aqueduct system and irrigation of farming and running water, uh, architecture they got from Rome, all right? Uh, the Phoenicians from Tyre and Carthaginians, as well as the Greeks, uh, likely introduced um, currency, monetization to the economy of Spain. And then beginning with the farming revolution, uh, it's still in the air, but some historians contend that the native Iberians did not farm, that it was the Celtic people that brought farming and metallurgy to them. So then you fast forward and you had a Renaissance in Cordoba, right? Especially Abd al-Rahman III. He brought in the finest of mathematicians, sculptors, musicians, artists, writers and poets, scientists, etc. And he had quite a library, and that at one point could rival the famous ancient library of Alexandria, Egypt. And so, as far as learning and algebra and mathematics, the Arabic and more Muslims brought those. The crossbow, the Asian use of gunpowder were brought from East Asia through Central Asia by way of the Mongolians, like Genghis Khan and his successors, as going all the way into Hungary and Poland and Russia, and then also the Moors and the Arabs coming into um, Spain and almost prevailing over France as well. And so again, that which they claim made them more civilized, they got from other people. All right. So I find that to be a second irony. So let's see here. Now, number three is tied to the Black Legend. Excuse me. Now, with the Black Legend, I want to keep some for that day when we do the Black Legend, but suffice it for now, it's using the Spanish as an anti-model for today's values, right? So if we are for tolerance, we show how Spain was intolerant. If we are for egalitarianism, everyone being on equal footing, then we show how the Spanish were very inequitable, very unfair, and just a few people, like an oligarchy, having all of the political, economic, and cultural and social power, okay, at the expense of everybody else. So tied to that, right, is the alleged religious fanaticism of the Spaniards. So to a lot of people, they tie that, if they adhere to the Black Legend, which is argumentative, they often tie it to the Reconquista. And the Reconquista, or the reconquest of Spain, was Spain's winning her own country back from the Moors, right? And so it was a very long and scattered process. So that's one reason why you should probably be a little bit skeptical of this simplistic, overly simplistic narrative that, okay, the Spaniards were fighting a holy war against the Moors at home, and so they carried that ethos, that value system, right, with them over across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas. Well, first of all, right, if they were taken over in 711, they finally kicked out the last remaining Basha, or Sultan, in 1492. That's well over 700 years. No one fights a neat, constant, right, national level rebellion for 7.5 centuries straight. So they had periods of, like I mentioned, of convivencia, of coexistence. They had areas and regions in which a lot of Spaniards became Muslims, became mujaharbs, as they were called, or muharabs. Um, they converted to Islam, and a lot of them, of course, did so for political reasons, so that they would not be left out. They would not have to pay a special unbelievers tax and what's the word, tribute, right? If they were to convert. And so it's messier than that, right? Of just having this neat claim of this long um, holy war. But nevertheless, right, it you have periods in which it really heated up. The 1000s, the 1200s, you have one leader after another in one region of Spain after another, declaring a holy war, getting the blessings from the Pope back in Rome to declare a holy war and grant indulgences, right? Forgiveness of sin and time spent in purgatory taken away if you were to fight against the Muslims in holy war. And so you absolutely have that. You also have a lot of people, right, who wrote back to family members from the Americas, right, that they had left behind in Spain. It happens so often that you find it literally in textbooks. It's very commonly known, but they use the term pasar mejor, right? Is they want to end up getting better off and improving their standard of living by moving to the Americas. And here you do find a pattern that does seem to fit. Of course, there are always exceptions to every pattern, but there were a lot of instances in which this pattern did fit. And that is the younger brothers, the younger sons of hidalgos back in Spain, back in Castile, especially. So in Castile, right, if you were to fight and successfully against the Moors, they granted you minor noble status, which was called an hidalgo. And with that came titles, privileges, opportunities, etc. Okay. And so these younger brothers saw their dads as their role models fight in a quote holy war against non-Catholic Christians, right? In this case, against Muslim Moors, defeat them in battle, and be rewarded with a much better life materially. And because of the mayorazgo, el hijo mayor, the oldest son, got everything from dad, the younger brothers got a taste of the good life from dad, but then the eldest brother got everything. So what do you know? Like Hernando Cortez, a lot of younger brothers of Hidalgos plan to follow their father's footsteps and go fight in a quote holy war across the Atlantic against Native Americans to improve their status and become Hidalgos themselves. All right. So we do know that to be true. Notice you have several popes intervene. Urban II, Innocent III, Eugenius IV. So they absolutely gave their blessings to this holy war. All right. And then something symbolic that may or may not be a big deal. But Santiago, right? James, Saint James. Someone found a body in a cathedral in Santiago and claimed that it was the Apostle James, that of the Apostle James. And so what they did is they made James their patron saint. And of course, there was some kind of more credulity back then, with lack of public education, whereby, they started spreading rumors that they saw visions of St. James fighting from the clouds on horseback with his lance exposed and ready to fight against the Moors as their leader from heaven. And so, at any rate, the Spanish cavalrymen would oftentimes make the sign of the cross, do the Catholic genuflect, and then say, Santiago con nosotros, right? St. James with us, fight with us, as they went into battle. And they said the same thing when they fought against the Aztec and when they fought in New Mexico against the Pueblo. All right. So they did carry that exact fight against the Moors recitation. All right. So that kind of segues us to the Black Legend, and that is the first assignment. So what I ask you to do is to pick one of those three sections, tell me what the thesis was, give me a couple examples of main supportive data that were used by me to support that thesis, and then tell me what you think as far as its credibility or being too slanted and not considering this or considering that. Okay, and by all means, tear into it. I have no problem with that, as I'm fully aware of how one-sided these are. All right. So good luck, and I'm hoping in the future that some of you are going to be able to make it. I've not been told anything about the demographic of the people of this class, but I'm now wondering if you guys might be high school students and literally at school during this time. So let me see what I can do. All right, so you guys have a good day. Good luck and take care.